Immediately after feeding the crowd, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. Lonely the boat, sailing at sea, tossed on a cold, stormy night. Cruel the sea, which seemed so wide, with waves so high. This single ship sailed the deep sea, straight into the gale. O Lord, great is the peril, dangerous to assail.
Welcome to PianoSide Worship at St. Paul Benson. We are a reconciling United Methodist congregation in one of Omaha's historic neighborhoods. I'm Reverend Stephanie Allsweet, and I'm joined today by my partner, Reverend Rev Brabec, and we are assisted in the production of PianoSide by our volunteers, Warren and Hank, and we give a lot of thanks for the time that they spend on the editing and production of PianoSide. You can find us during the week on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course our YouTube channel. And we look forward to seeing you in all these different ways. Welcome.
When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. Strong winds arose in all their rage, tossing the tiny lone boat. Waves below high, tossing the boat, lost and afloat. The sailor stood all alone, wondering what to do. Oh Lord, so helpless was he, wondering what to do.
Will you join me in prayer? Loving God, we lift to you the prayers of our lives, knowing that you hear our prayers, spoken and unspoken. Today we lift up the prayers of this faith community, remembering those who are grieving, recent losses from days gone by, praying for healing for those who are suffering, remembering those who are beginning new things, and especially students, educators, and staff as they make the move back to school in whatever form it takes. Today we remember our friends and neighbors who are on hospice and the people who love them and care for them. God, in your mercy, hear our prayer. We lift up our neighborhood of Benson and the children and families in our Child Development Center, giving thanks for the diversity of this neighborhood and space, praying for an end of violence, and that we might continue to build neighborhood in this community that we treasure. God, in your mercy, hear our prayer. For our state, for the unicameral, which will be concluding its work soon, for all who exercise wisdom, that they might continue to do so, and that we, as participants in our government, in our city, might learn to advocate for one another and for justice. God, in your mercy, hear our prayer. For the leaders of this nation and others as they continue to make decisions related to the global health crisis, as people live in the midst of natural disaster and other disasters, as people continue to move across different lines, boundaries of sorts, we offer our prayers. God, in your mercy, hear our prayer. And for this earth on which we live, we give thanks for its sustenance and pray that we might continue to be, in an ever-growing way, better and better stewards of this earth on which we live. God, in your mercy, hear our prayer. We offer these prayers knowing that we come together, our voices joined, offering these prayers to the God who loves us all and is always willing, able, ready to listen. Amen.
And early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. Trembling with fear, deep in despair, looking for help all around, the sailor saw light from above. Help can be found. My God is here in my small boat, standing by my side. Oh, I trust in the Savior, now in my life abide.
Will you join me in prayer? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
But when he noticed the strong wind, Peter became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" Jesus immediately reached his hand out and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Pleading for mercy, oh Lord, even a sinner like me. Come and, oh Lord, come to the sea as in Galilee. Please save my life from all danger. Grant a peaceful life. Oh, please be merciful, Lord, in times of calm and strife.
So here is a scripture with which you might be familiar. It involves a boat and walking on water. But first, there's a mountain. So, Jesus, prior to this, has gone off to be by himself, but all the people followed him, and there was no food. And that's where we have the miracle of the loaves and fishes, which we talked about last week. So after that happens, Jesus tries again to be alone. And this time he succeeds because we hear that he puts the disciples in a boat and he puts them out to sea. And he ascends a mountain. He goes up the mountain, a place where we know he would be closer to God. So we've got Jesus on the mountain, disciples who are, a good number of them are fishermen in a boat. So these are people who are familiar with the weather patterns and the sea and the boat, which is probably a fishing boat. And yet the weather is such in the area that it can be hard to predict when a storm might come up. So they are in the boat and they see somebody coming towards them, not in a boat. It's a figure walking on water. So obviously it's a ghost. It has to be a ghost. Their friend Jesus is on a mountain, and only ghosts can walk on water anyway. So they know it's a ghost, and therefore they are terrified. So Jesus speaks to them, and they realize that it's not a ghost. And Peter says to Jesus, I think you need to ask me to come to you. So Jesus says to Peter, come. Jesus gets out of the boat and begins walking towards Jesus. We hear that his eyes are focused on Jesus. So in a literal sense, he is focused on Jesus as he walks on the water. But then the wind comes up. A storm starts to come in, and Peter is distracted. And instead of focusing on Jesus, looks at the wind and begins to worry about the storm and begins to sink. He cries out for help, and Jesus immediately puts out a hand and brings him back up, and they both get back into the boat. They're back in the boat. And the disciples who are there cheer because not only has Peter been saved, but the storm is now over. They're back in the boat. So it's a pretty quick moving story. It takes us from a mountain to the boat to walking on water. There's a ghost, but that's not a ghost. There's a rough sea. There's fear. It's quieted. There's cheering. There's a lot of action there. And a simple reading of this scripture might say, the point of the scripture is to rely on Jesus because he'll calm your storm and he'll make sure you get back in the boat. And that is a reasonable reading of the scripture. I think there's more going on here, though, than just that. Because it has to do with who this happens to. We have disciples as witnesses, disciples who we experience as learning throughout the Gospels, how to become better disciples, how to grow in their faith. And we have the figure of Peter, who specifically is learning in this story from Jesus. Peter he's back in the boat, but for what purpose? The story doesn't end because Peter has been saved from his own fear. Something that Peter might have learned from this experience is this. It's what we might learn. We must continue to learn and grow in our faith so that we are better and better at keeping our focus so we are not distracted by the winds, so that in time we might learn how to be the ones who also reach out our hands to help others who might have become distracted. The celebration is real. We're called to celebrate each time the storm is calmed. But we are also called to follow up on God's saving power by learning ourselves how to grow and deepen in our faith. Because the wind will blow again. And while we need Jesus, we also need Peter and each other to be prepared as disciples. So, characters in this story. We have the people in the boat. We hear them described first as being afraid. They're afraid of the ghost. They're afraid of the storm. They are afraid for Peter. But then we hear that they are a living witness to what has occurred. So they go from being fearful to being a witness. And as they are a witness to what has occurred, they rejoice. 3 different actions of movement in faith. As they experience God's presence in the form of Jesus, they are able to be a living witness to what has happened, and they are able to rejoice. We find the character of Peter, who in this scripture is an adventurer. He's the one that says, "If it is you, command me to walk on the water." And there's that moment where we all think, he's doing it. He's doing it. Our adventurer is walking on the water. In our place, Peter is doing it. Then we have the whoops, there's a wind moment. It's not a squirrel. Whoo, it's the wind. And he cries out, "Lord, save me." Our adventurer has run up against a crisis and cries out for help. And Jesus catches him. And that's when they get in the boat and the winds cease. Something for us to consider is this. Do we only rely on Jesus? Do we only cry out to God? Do we only seek the Holy Spirit when we feel that we are in trouble? Or might we learn to cry out to God, to look for the Holy Spirit, to call upon Jesus as a guide every day so that we strengthen ourselves as disciples? We pastors and some lay people use a type of book. It's a very specific genre called a commentary when we are studying Scripture. So there are people who put together books that go through scriptures on a certain theme. So you might have a commentary that is written by someone who is an expert, say, on the Gospel of Matthew, or somebody who is an expert on the Psalms. And they work their way through those scriptures, offering insight into them. Sometimes a commentary might have a different kind of theme. Perhaps it's somebody who is looking at a feminist view of the world, or is reading the scriptures with an eye towards the natural world or the environment. There is not yet a pandemic commentary. We didn't know we needed one. And so those of us who study the scripture and preach on it are in a sense writing that commentary as we go. I am not usually a fan of quick quips, but this week I encountered a phrase that I thought I might add to my interpretation of this scripture with an eye towards what it means to read it during a pandemic. And I would offer this to you. It's the kind of phrase that has no citation. I'm not sure who originally said it, but it's probably already on at least one poster in a dentist's office. It goes like this: just because you're struggling doesn't mean you're failing. Just because you're struggling doesn't mean you're failing. I might have thought that was kind of silly about 6 months ago. At the moment, it seems like pure wisdom. And if I had had a moment to freeze frame Peter so I could give him advice while he was on that water, I think I would have said to him, Peter, just because you're struggling doesn't mean you're failing. And I think that's a version of what Jesus was saying to his disciples. You may be struggling because you're distracted by the wind. You may be struggling because you were afraid that I was a ghost. You may be struggling because you have a lack of control over your lives. You may be struggling because you do not know how to interpret what's happening around you. But you are not failing. The disciples were not failing because they were still learning. They knew to rejoice when Peter and Jesus got back in the boat. And we know from the scriptures we continue to read that they succeeded at developing their faith life, at learning the skills they needed to carry that story forward across both geography and time. And what we hear in these scriptures is a message to us, even as we fail to walk on water, even as we might fail to fix the things that are broken around us, things that we might not have ever expected to have to deal with. We hear a message coming through time, through the scriptures, from a lake whose waters had been troubled. Just because you're struggling doesn't mean you're failing. We hear a sure and certain hope and promise that as disciples, we are called to continue to listen to Jesus' call on our lives and develop our skills as disciples so that we too might rejoice each time we see God's work in the world, that we might rejoice each time the Holy Spirit moves us in a creative new way in the world, and that we might rejoice that in God we never find failure. We find things that are new, mysterious, and at times frightening because they're so new and mysterious. But always, 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 God is with us. And we are called to lay aside that fear so that we might walk forward in faith, whether that be on water or on the path of discipleship. And for this, we give thanks. Amen.
When they got back into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." This is the word of life. Thanks be to God. Storms in our lives, cruel and cold, surely will arise again, threatening lives, threatening us on life's wild sea. Peaceful and great, God's hand is there, firmly in control. Oh Lord, come, peace comes from you, peace comes in my lone soul. Thank you so much for joining us for PianoSide Chat.
We will continue to be here for you, and we appreciate so much your support of this ministry. It's been quite a ride in this boat, and we look forward to continuing to walk this journey together with you. Thanks for being here.